Once again, Luke gives us an insight as to who he's teaching to and for. I think that's always interesting when we get that little introduction. Tells us in Luke 18, verse 9, very important verse, to some who are confident of their own righteousness and who look down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. Well, let me read on a little bit in the parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's good in a way that Luke doesn't mention a specific group. And one writer commented, we've got to resist the temptation of making the Pharisee a chump and the tax collector a hero. Now, for me, that would undermine the surprise of God's grace. For God's grace is always a surprise. And in the parable, that clearly comes through. You see, the parable needs not so much an interpretation as an observation. So when we hear that parable, we don't need a teacher or a preacher to say, this means this and this. Just watch it and look at it and see how you can gain from it so much of what it is that's important about life. You've got these 2 characters. They'd be easily identified by the first readers. Even if we find it needs a little explanation, they would easily be understood by those people watching for the first time. You see, the Pharisee follows the custom of praying in the temple when he stands to pray. It's a bit odd for some of us. In some parts of the world, people stand, but he stands to pray. Tells us quite clearly, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed. God, I thank you that I'm not like the other people. Oh, gosh, what a prayer. You can hardly imagine wanting to pray that, can you? But because many of us would have exactly the opposite feeling. But there he was, standing by himself, praying, I thank you, I'm not like the others. Now, the tax collector stood at the back of the temple. He's almost wanting to hide. His face is downcast. He beats his breast in remorse. He knows exactly who he is. He doesn't need anybody to say, now, be careful, tax collector. We know you're a sinner. We know you're bad. He knows all that. He doesn't need anybody to tell him that. You can tell from his prayer that there's something very powerful about this experience for him. So as you look at the parable, let's note that 4 damning eyes are found in the prayer of the Pharisee. 4 times does he talk about himself. He stood by and says, my God, I thank you that I'm not like the others. I fast and I give 1/10 of all I get. That's the most common word in his prayer is I. Whereas I sense when I hear the prayer of the tax collector, it begins with those powerful, he daren't even look up. He is so conscious of his own need that he doesn't do that. Now, I think that this parable probably has a lot to say to many of us. There is no doubt that you don't need me to say which of these 2 characters here is the one who has the right attitude. You don't need me to tell you that. But perhaps all of us need to recognize that getting to that place where the Pharisee is where he is and the tax collector where he is takes often a lifetime of recognition on our part. For the tax collector, there was something very powerful. And the final words to me in this particular parable are the key to everything. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. Gosh, justified before God. Not justified before themselves, not justified before their friends, but justified before God. We heard earlier in the show of someone who really found their life at a point where it felt hopeless and helpless, and yet they found the hope which is Christ, which is not to say, I'm better than other people, I've suddenly got it all together, but recognizing need. And I think one of the things that Wesley Mission that we understand and that we're involved in every day is giving people dignity and worth, and telling them that what matters is not that you feel you're better than other people, but the recognition that God is concerned about you and that God can give you meaning and purpose and hope. That to me is the greatest gift that we can give to anyone. It's the greatest purpose that Wesley Mission has always been about. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. This is the upside-down world of Jesus Christ that offers to you and to me enormous hope now and always.